You're listening to Rumor Mill News Radio. This is Raylan Allen, and my guest today is Clif from Half Past Human. Clif and his buddy, George Ure, two self-described time monks, share dire predictions based on their WebBot technology. Their method captures changes in language pattern within Internet discussions. The aggregated data is then processed with software to determine various keywords which they interpret in a predictive fashion. So, hello, Clif. I hope you're there with me. And I guess that he's not there with me. So let me, until Clif gets on the line, let me read a little bit about Clif High. Maybe some of you have heard of the WebBot project. But for those of you who have not, it is quite intriguing. The WebBot project, developed in the late 1990s, was created to assist in making stock market predictions. The technology uses a system of spiders to crawl the Internet and search for keywords, much like a search engine does. When a keyword is located, the bot program takes a snapshot of the text preceding and following the keyword. This snapshot of text is sent to a central location where it is then filtered to define meaning. And I have just been informed that Clif is on the air with us now. So welcome to Rumor Mill News Radio.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry about the delay.
Oh, that's okay. Everything went screwy here in my house, too. With dogs barking and people coming to my door, even though I have a huge sign saying, "Do not interrupt me," from 11 to 2.
I wish I had one of those on my telephone.
Oh, gosh. I need those on my telephone, too. Anyway, I've got all sorts of questions for you, but before I really start off with this whole list of questions, can you tell people what in the world in you saw that this sort of thing could be created? Where did the idea come from?
Well, I like to think, I like to follow Buckminster Fuller's advice and on the assumptions that there is no such thing as an original idea, and you just are sort of an antenna, and you're walking around one day and an idea smacks you in the head, and you resonate with it and decide, oh, okay, this is something that I can, handle or pursue. So, in that sense, what I was doing was it was actually started in probably 1989 or so, in a couple of consulting gigs that I was doing for some major software houses that led to thinking about how we stored data. I was paid to think about this because if you imagine the situation, places like Chrysler, for instance, they may have 100,000 workstations, and they've got to keep track of inventory, the type of chip in it, all these different kinds of parameters. And yet, basically, the number of words relating to any given workstation is a relatively finite core. But yet, here they are for 119,000 workstations storing the word, like I-386 designating the chipset. They might store that 90,000 times. And it's really absurd. What they needed to do, in my opinion, was to store it once and then just have pointers back to it so they could really be very effective searches and hunts on large data sets, which led me to all this other thinking. And then I had to stop and, in the process of this, consider how we use language and what its intent was. And there's a key thing about language, and that is that language is a binary system, if you will, in the sense that it conveys factual information, but it also simultaneously, in most words, conveys emotional information. So there are these two layers that are operating, and a person, based on their receptivity, could look at either layer. And this frequently accounts for misunderstandings, especially at global levels, where you have a particular cultural bias, for instance, to look at things in a factual manner, or look at things at the underlying emotional level. And this accounts for a great deal of our misunderstandings as Westerners with other groups such as, Islamists or Chinese or whoever, right, is a cultural bias in the inherent language handling. And so once you understand that language carries with it an emotional context, then it was like, let's go in there and root around, because it just dawned on me one day in 1996 or something, we're in a stock market bubble. This is going to go to huge heights and then crash. I might as well, at the time I had had some consulting work, but I had nothing really on the horizon. And it dawned on me, well, geez, these people that are out there playing around in the stock market are using their monkey minds and reacting at an emotional level. They're not reading the factual information about these stocks, especially internet stocks, and I'd worked for some of those companies, and I knew they were really bogus, and that there was no there there. So it dawned on me that, well, maybe one could quantify that in a computer environment and derive some useful information for making stock picks. Sort of makes sense?
It absolutely makes sense. Now, most people who know anything at all about you know that you predicted 9/11. At least that's what the internet legends have become.
Okay, one could interpret it that way, that in June of that year we put out words that described some of the significant aspects of 9/11, although we missed some of the key words. And so you can say we predicted it or not, but we did indeed, in anticipation of that event, describe an upcoming event that would shift society. And we had some of the aspects of the event that would be involved.
And what aspects did you have?
We had military would be involved, and that there would be an accident, and this was a conjunction or a union of data sets. So we had it as military/accident, because at that time, I have to stop and say that all of my work is based on a lexicon, which is just basically a giant alphabetical listing of words to which I've attached all these numeric values. But at the time, in early 2001, I'd only reached like about midway through the M's in the English language, and so hadn't modeled the word terrorism, or we might have actually found that word within our data sets if we'd gotten that far in our modeling. So at that stage, we had military accident, attack on the money centers of the planet, a tipping point for all humans on the planet. Everything would change thereafter, and others, which are still posted on George Schur's site to this day.
Well, boy, you sure did. You didn't really, say the World Trade Center is going to be attacked. You didn't say that.
No. In that sense, geographically, so to speak, we had money center. And, at the time you could argue that the World Trade Center was indeed the money center of the planet.
My gosh, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
And that's the ambiguity of the language, and that's why we get into these issues of interpretation, and that's why sometimes we can be extremely accurate when there's very little ambiguity within the underlying context, such as much later, I think it was probably 2003 or so, we had a very descriptive piece that appeared about 3 weeks in anticipation of a power outage in the Northeast. And we described all kinds of stuff because, south is south, railroad yard is railroad yard, so it was fairly precise. But some other things, like the space shuttle disaster, for months before that, we kept picking up this information about maritime disaster and large levels of grief and all of this kind of stuff. Because, of course, we didn't at that point have the S's modeled, and so hadn't had space shuttle in there. Because there's, hundreds of thousands of words involved, and it takes a long time. So we were picking it up through its analog of maritime. And how does the maritime industry relate to the Columbia? Well, it's Columbia, gem of the ocean, and it's the ocean set that bound the two.
That's right. You are seeing something for this summer, and I also read on your site that you're shutting down. Does what you're seeing for this summer have anything to do with your taking the summer off?
Yes, of course. I mean, it puts the cap on everything. I've been working very hard on this project since '97. Essentially no vacations, and through really horrifically personal events throughout these last 10 years. And in addition to that, since October, we've been running on a single lexicon that hasn't been tuned, so there's tons of maintenance work that needed to be done, and we needed to get at it, and it was really piling up, and I didn't want to let it go too much further. And then we got this forecast for relatively nasty times over the course of summer, and it was just like, well, it's a good time to just shut down and get about our business here and do something else for a while.
What are you seeing for this summer? That does not... I think a chill of fear just ran up every listener's back.
Nothing that you can't already imagine happening. I mean, basically, summer is a progression of the trends that are already established as of May 14th. So a few days ago, we had an emotional trend shift, and we will find that many of the stock market kind of players and the derivative guys have run into this emotional wall, and their enthusiasm is fading. The Climate is becoming more dire to them again. They're now aware of greater risks, and all of this will escalate over the course of summer to a new peak between July 15th and August 15th, in which we think there will be a very large derivative bubble collapse. Now, you need to understand that economic bubbles work in the manner of one balloon inside another balloon inside another balloon. And as long as you keep blowing up the outer balloon, nothing ever really escapes. But we're about to hit the largest of all bubbles, which is this bailout bubble, which is financed directly by the last of the previous bubbles, which was the derivative bubble, which took over from the real estate bubble, which took over from the internet bubble, etc. So our data shows that when the derivative bubble goes in between July 15th and August 15th, it's going to set up a series of events that will come back to haunt us in fall as the bailout bubble fails, and fundamentally at that point, the dollar dies insofar as we can tell as a global reserve currency. We may still continue to use it here in the U.S., and it may still have some level of meaning, if not value, here in the U.S., but as a global reserve petrodollar currency, it will no longer be really viable, and the fallout or the earthquakes that result from that socially will be quite dire, because it's going to put huge amounts of pressure all across the planet. Now, in conjunction with that, because our data sets are so large, because we just examined literally everything we can possibly find out there, assuming that we're so stupid we dare not throw anything away because it might have meaning that we would discover later. So we proceed and we start looking at various different things. We see that there's emotional sets pointing to what we call terra intrusions. That is to say, physical universe is going to intrude on us this summer as a species in some very harsh ways, and in fact is already doing so, as we're seeing with all the screwy weather, the floods, et cetera, and it's going to get a lot worse. It's now also going to start including rampaging, if you will. I don't really know if that term could be applied, but an escalation in infertility cases of all kinds, including infertility in plants. So we're going to have crop failures, and this will be the beginning of a long-term trend towards drought and famine, if you will, that appears to go well beyond 2012.
Wow.
That's just pretty much the start of it. And as you can imagine, economic pressures at a global level are going to really strain the existing hierarchical, patriarchal power structure, and we're going to have people squabbling and trying to kill each other in basically what George Ure calls resource wars.
Right, right. Well, I know that one of the things that you said in your Veritas interview is that everyone should concentrate on their own personal needs right now.
Yes, and that actually could be a small local safety valve. In other words, there's less emotional pressure and less physical pressure on the global food supply if you start producing food in your backyard, and you magnify that by millions of people, and things could be altered in a relatively short period of time. So in that sense, we're not saying that any of this is carved in stone. It's just that these are the forecasts resulting from the emotional trends that are inherent at the moment, and if things don't change, if we don't make a huge effort to do things at an individual level,